Hi, my name's Rocky Dobey. Live in Toronto. I grew up, and I've been in Toronto since I was 8 years old. I grew up in northern Manitoba, so I kind of grew up in the bush, and I moved to Toronto as a 10-year-old. That's kind of part of me. My parents were Ukrainian, so I grew up in a Ukrainian household, going to Ukrainian church and mass. Well, they didn't have it in Thompson, but they had a version of it. And I grew up in Toronto. We lived, it was my mother and 4 kids. We moved to Toronto on midnight move, and so I kind of feel like I'm Toronto-based Ukrainian kid. Well, I've done a lot of things over a lot of years. I'm in my 60s, so I've done a lot of different things, and I never really made art for a reason. I just kind of made it. And it's kind of complicated because I've done all kinds of things at the very same time, so I was trying to think about how to answer this question. My creative process is, I think, because I never really, I was a street artist starting off. I'm mostly known for my street art before it was even called street art, so I would just put things up as I felt. I always try to make space. I think in retrospect, I was always trying to make spaces in the city, mostly along Yonge Street or any other street, Queen Street over the years in the 80s. And because I was mostly anonymous, I was anonymous to most of the people. Some art I was anonymous to, some I was. It depended, but generally I never signed my pieces. I had no pseudonym. So friends wouldn't know I was putting up work, and it was interesting. Now I realize why I was doing that, but at the time I was doing it, maybe I was too insecure, I didn't know, but I was always bolting things up on the street. So my practice is basically I've only just started to show in galleries. I had my first gallery show, like it's on right now. I'm in my 60s, so a gallery show that I actually made art for. I've been in lots of gallery shows that my work has been included, my drawings, my thing, but this is the first show I actually made things for a gallery. So that's a long way to go to be late 60s and do your first show. So it's not really a very good art. I wouldn't call that a very good career or method. So I always felt I was just kind of, in retrospect, I was just kind of reading the room. I grew up wherever I was when I was 12 years old or 16 years old or 26 years old. I kind of look around me, and because since I made things all the time, and I realized I was just kind of seeing where society was at, or where my friends were at, or I was at, and I would post. Sometimes I'd post personal things about friends. Sometimes I put positive things, sometimes negative things. Sometimes I was doing overtly political work. I do these overt political billboards, indigenous rights. I do prison justice rights. At the very same time, next day I'd put up intimate little books of babies that are swaddled and paint them on the covers, and I would do both at the very same time. And I remember being at parties where people would be loving you love those big things, and then making fun of the artist who was doing these small pieces. Actually, and I was the same artist, and I have to go, yeah, those are really not political, so it depends on the crowd. So this question is complex because I never really I never knew what I was making. I never knew it was art. When I was in my 20s, I was an iron worker working in high-rise office. I was in the union, so I got into union politics, and I was doing union kind of art and around, because that's what I was doing. I did that for a number of years, and that was an interesting part of my life. I always made art all the time. I didn't know what it was. I remember seeing people carrying portfolios going to art school. I go, wow, that's amazing. Can you imagine doing that? Not thinking that I could go. Thought that wasn't really for me. And I didn't know what I was doing was art. So that's a little bit of why I do things. So it's not really very coherent. It wasn't thought out. It wasn't planned out. It's what I did. Every day I made work my whole life. And I put them up. And I just happened to put it up because what else was I going to do with it? kind of how accidentally that happened. And that's why I made what I do. It's kind of just extension of living. I think my work's all about power all the time, because it's always about me trying to take up space and making space. I always believe, even my younger, I'm making a space that's a safe space. When I was a boy, I think, we put up stuff, and I think in retrospect, it was about making space and structure. So all my art, because it's coming from me reading the room about politics, what's going on, it always tried to be not advertising, but it's still stuff on the streets. I mean, I'm all connected. And I did some work around capital. I mean, the idea of capitalism is complex, because a lot of people I know who are capitalists aren't really capitalists. They kind of believe in it, but they're not, just because buying and selling, I don't really have a problem with that. Right now we kind of have a capitalist feudal system where the top 1% runs the world. I shouldn't say it that way. There's a lot of people who wealth should be distributed more evenly. Yeah, I've always tried to make space in the city, and I think by making positive space, sometimes I did a lot of work around prisons, and so I always found it meant a lot to people who were a lot of my work about prisons is people are always confusing what I'm doing. A lot of it's for families of prisoners, because children, from my own experience, a lot of children have parents in prison. So when I do prison support work, I'm realizing that when you put somebody in prison, sometimes you're innocent, sometimes not. If you're indigenous, you're in prison more often, but there's also children involved. And so a lot of my work with are for families and children, because in America, there's 1 million people in prison. So by making these spaces, I'm making a space that's challenging the powers that be, because they kind of feel, I use the prison example because that's you can't really talk about it out loud, because everybody's got to, it's a complex issue, and people are always, oh yeah, but they killed somebody, should go in jail. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a substructure. So talking about prisons is one way to talk about it. And a lot of my artwork are prisons. They're all drawings of prisons. I always find it as a metaphor anyways. Because we talk about factories as prisons, schools as prisons. We kind of use it all kinds of ways, but we don't really want to talk about prison. I'm kind of talking a lot about that one aspect. I could talk about other aspects, but that's one example of. The example is when I put up a piece around prison. It means a lot to me when somebody comes up to me and goes, "Oh, it's okay." They can feel warmth. Who's ever in jail, if it's their father or something, they can still feel something, because everybody gets out of jail, 99%. So it's that warmth I want to create, which is different than power is about taking warmth away, do what you have to do, and not having the individual have feelings. So by having feelings is kind of taking away power, because it's an abstract way of thinking about power. I don't really, I've done political art, real hardcore, down with the state kind of stuff, and I've done not that kind of work, and there might be reasons. When there's an uprising, Oka happened, I put real Oka anti-political stuff up, because Oka was happening, there was gunfights, and it was actually war. I remember going down, so that was why. And another day I'll do something a little less overt. That's a little bit of a power there. Well, 13 and a half is a number I like to look at it. It changed meanings over the years. That's 12 judges, 1 juror, and half a chance. 30 years ago, when I was doing prison justice posters and stuff around, there's a magazine called Prison News Service I did illustrations for. 13 and a half was a symbol that was often used. It was in Canadian prisons, used for a justice symbol. And the 13 and 1 juror, 12 jurors, 1 judge, and half a fucking chance is kind of an interesting term, because if you're from the upper class, you would look at it, oh, that's a rip-off, you only get half a chance. But at the lower classes, all they want is half a chance, because they don't expect to even get that. So I always like how people think it. I can tell people how they read it. But that term has changed since then. So I know I'm more reading the number change, because now it's being more used as an indigenous term in prison, indigenous prisoners, and it wasn't like that before. Not that I knew of. So now I'm staying away from using it that way. I'm trying to think about it differently. But that number is now being used mostly in indigenous, because the indigenous prison situation is pretty dire, especially in Manitoba where I grew up. So that's the 13 and a half. And I like the number, and it's also got religious canon. I can go to Romans 13 verses 1 and 2. It's kind of similar about Jesus saying, given to authority. So one of the works I'm going to put in the show is this scratching of a big painting, copper bulldozer with some prison buildings and oil refineries. And I used it in the prison in this piece here. The bulldozer is a middle symbol. It's covered in Ukrainian. All the design and stuff is all traditional, classic Ukrainian embroidery stitching. So the dozer's covered in bulldozers covered in. And I always thought dozers interesting because there's dozers. A lot of my works are made with bricks, as if making things. I always find I'm not that interested in nature art, things coming from nature. I'm kind of interested in it. We as society, we build our society. Society is the way it is because we built it this way. If it's fair, because we built it. If it's not fair, it's how we built it. It's not. There's no metaphysical theory behind it. And the bulldozer to me is that metaphor. And in this piece, the bulldozer also. My dad was a cat scanner, which is the name for. He was a bulldozer, drove cat. My brothers both drove cat, and I had a bulldozer recently, and I also drove bulldozer. So I have a personal affiliation with the bulldozer as a positive thing, building things. Also as a negative thing, because my father was driving bulldozer. That's how he got in northern Manitoba. Bulldozer up in far northern Manitoba, putting in roads. There's no road, putting roads in and stuff, which is part of colonization. You put dozers in. Dozers come first, then the roads come in. So for me, it's always been a strong symbol. I used it at all kinds of. There also was a magazine that I also illustrated for called Bulldozer. And it was the magazine was called Bulldozer, and that's kind of how I got into the prison stuff. There's the magazine called Bulldozer, the only vehicle for prison reform. I go, oh, that's good. That's interesting, and I started doing illustrations for that. But the piece has got clouds that look kind of light. They're kind of light and cheerful, I think, and the piece, if you look at it literally, it looks kind of hard, but if you stand back, there's a beauty to it, a lightness to it. So I'm always realizing that I'm a pretty positive person. I've gone through a lot of changes in my life. Right now, where I am right now, I'm a positive person, but we live in a world where it's not, people are struggling and it's complex, and I'm trying to not cover up that, but also try to show that fine line of showing that things can change. I totally believe in change, but I actually believe in positive change. Well, it's changed a lot, and it hasn't changed. It depends. I've changed. It's also been over 55 years. I started when I was 12 years old. I'm 66 now, so whatever the math is. It's a lot of years. But I would say my childhood stuff was just posters on the wall with a good friend of mine. We would put stuff on Yonge Street. As a shoe shine boy, I was a shoe shine boy on Yonge Street, and Ronnie Bolter was a really close friend of mine. He's the one who started it. He could draw. We were good friends. We played hockey together. He also was a single mom. He also had a single mom, so we had that in common. And we kind of put out the cover of your post. Kids did that. It was not uncommon. And then photocopy machine. So that's a whole different world. Then slowly I started putting up more. I think the first thing when Ronnie died at 19. Then I was working on a construction site that had copper left over, so I started putting up copper pieces on the street. Anonymously, just drawings of what I was thinking, memorials to my friend Ronnie who died, who meant a lot to me. He was like Toronto's first street artist. And I started doing memorials, and it's still extended from that. So Toronto back then that was not considered art. There was no word for street art back then. It was basically cat posters and my stuff, and nobody really knew what it was. I didn't get any comments. The only time I would say in the early 80s, I was doing these, on Yonge Street was my most interesting, when I realized, oh, this is something, this changes the world. My mother worked at the Eaton store on Yonge Street, with the old Eaton store, and I worked in the old Eaton store. My mother got me a job in the old Eaton store before the Eaton Center. And I got to see security in the store, how they worked, follow people. And then I put up a series of street art piece, how to spot store security in Eaton, just out of my head. And the next thing I know, I'm in a subway and people are talking about, hey, did you see how they steal stories? I go, wow, people actually read this. I remember feeling that, oh, that's funny. Why would they read that? I don't know why I was doing it. I just find that was my, but Toronto, so it wasn't considered art at that time. This would be 70, early 70s or something, mid 70s. It wasn't really considered art. I mean, I didn't go to art school. I didn't know about it. I didn't take art in high school. I didn't even know it was available. That was not really my thing. And then I just kept on making art. I mean, in the 80s, Toronto was kind of empty. All the factories left out, and I got involved in political groups. There's empty buildings and warehouses. I lived in Kensington Market. So I was putting up banners, but I was still working in union construction. So I had these two lives. I'd be working high-rise construction, getting involved in unions, and I was also coming back and doing street art, doing political work, and getting involved in both. I have pictures of my studio just covered in stuff. And then as bookstores were closing, I started putting books on the street. This all sounds mangled because it isn't. I didn't prepare for this, but I realized that my whole life has just been putting up stuff and not really knowing why, and only in retrospect. So I just started putting up. But Toronto was a smaller city. I think it started turning into art around late 80s, 90s. My art was considered art, and I know, even though I was still anonymous. Nobody knew who it was. There was a lot of articles. There's a few articles written on me in papers. People tried to interview me or ask me questions. I refused. Some people knew, but some people didn't. And I was putting up, I put dozens and dozens. I put them hundreds of books up in the street. And that's when I realized it was considered art. But I still was going to work every day in construction and not really part of the art world. But I did, not part of it, but I also was interested in the art world. I was reading about it, thinking about it, starting to. But I always, from an outsider, always like I don't belong. And then I go through every decade. I also did posters for events and then it's my posters. I would draw posters. I did from the illustrations. I would draw posters and they'd get sent around. People know me from my posters, and that was accidental again. But Toronto now is like Toronto doing street art now. There's so much stuff in the street. Before you look at my photographs, I did an idea of abandoned buildings were all over Toronto. You could put things in buildings and be up there for a year. I covered buildings with 30 feet long paintings, put them up, and they would be up there for years. Nobody even noticed. I tell people that now. They go, "What's an abandoned building?" So I have to explain to them that it's hard to imagine that Toronto is full of abandoned buildings, and you could actually just put up art anywhere and nobody cared. And the same as putting on the street. There was no infrastructure to care. Nobody collected them, nobody stole them, nobody painted them over. There was no graffiti. Graffiti was just starting in Toronto. I knew some of the early graffiti artists, but they were just starting, and it was pretty, and Toronto was a pretty small town back then. I mean, it changes. And now, now I'm making, then I started doing, now I'm still making art, I'm still putting art on the street. I'm doing it a lot differently. I'm trying to make it even smaller and a little intimate. The pieces I do now are really tiny, that you kind of have to find it. It's hard to find. Like you just kind of like finding a quarter on the street. That's kind of how I'm countering it now, because you can't really compete with advertising. And I don't know why I'm still doing it. I was kind of against doing it for a while in my brain, like, I'm making them really intimate. They can come down easy. I'm making them. I'm still doing it, but now I'm starting to do. I just had to show. I have a show at a real gallery with real work, and that's a whole new chapter. And I've been enjoying it. I'm retired. I want to retire with no pension, so I got to find a way. Oh, maybe I can sell a painting. I don't know. maybe not. But it's a whole different way of working. But Toronto was, Toronto's a completely different city. Like in terms of the diversity has changed a lot. I did a lot of stuff around privilege in the early '80s, mid '80s, and it was considered like, oh. Then now we look at it now, it's so bad. I mean, it was hard to believe. Back then, it was like, Toronto just changed so much. Toronto is a more vibrant city. It's diverse. I find it amazing. Toronto's an amazing city if you have a place to live. If you don't have a place to live, then you're struggling. It's hard to get through, and I know that. And I'm trying to. That's the show I'm having right now. It's called Home Sweet Home, because I know that most people that I know, all they talk about is where am I going to live? And so that's kind of the vibe that I feel now in Toronto, which didn't exist, one time. But now it's like the vibe I'm feeling in Toronto from people I know and I see is, where am I going to live? Or I got a place to live. I can't move. I can't break up because I can't afford half a rent. I've heard all kinds of stories. So the home is where my work is now, and I think that's Toronto's biggest issue right now for the people I know. Some people love obviously, if you own a house, you're probably not complaining. I was so out of touch with whether people checking my stuff out. I remember, well, it was based on, when I was very young, I was doing these photocopies called Do You Think You're Tough? I did this drawing of a boy and a tree. And the boy had a football helmet on and smashed his head against a tree. And I remember drawing, so you think you're tough? And meet me here at 3 o'clock, or meet me at 12 o'clock, and I put up in areas. And I've done over every 5 years, for the last 50 years, I put up versions of it. Some in brass and copper. Do you think you're tough? Meet me at this corner. And I don't know why I did it, but I've gotten feedback from people. Actually, people have told me they've gone to the location, and other people thought they were scared of what this meant. I think the piece, people resonate with it differently. I like the piece. It means a lot to me. Because I think it's very intimate and personal about everybody who is going through troubles and hard times, smashing your head against the tree, and can I do this? Can I get through it? Or it's also very clearly a boy with a thing on it as opposed to a girl. Boy, what that means. I knew very little. Because I knew when I was a boy, there was boy culture and girl culture back then. Maybe, and glad now it's changing slowly, because I hung on a Yonge Street where the boys hung out, and my sister was in a whole different culture. We really split, and society's changing now, where we can actually do things together. We can we can play more role in that. So you think your tough thing was about fighting that boy thing, I think, because I never played football, but I was a scrawny little kid, and my dad said some comment. I never knew we left him when we were 9 years old, but he did say how scrawny I was, and I remember it really affected me. I probably that affected me a lot too, being a scrawny little kid. So I think you're tough. I can do this, so it's about macho, and I was just kind of like a little thin little kid who was not into that, with a name like Rocky, which is I'm not it was a weird name for a skinny little kid. Because I didn't want to fight. I don't know, that's a little bit of rambling about that one piece that I did that I still have pieces on the street that some have been up for 20 years, still have brass pieces. Do you think you're tough? I don't know, people still go to the place or what's going on, but they're punched in, they're still there. But that one people have commented on, and I don't really know what it means, but I know how it feels. And it feels like it's about, I'm making this up as I go because I never thought about talking about it. It's about a boy. It's about I think boyhood struggling.